Hello and welcome to the special podcast celebrating National Weather Podcast Awareness Month. My name is James Breiton from the Carolina Weather Group, joining you from Charlotte, North Carolina. We have a selection of your favorite hosts and some new friends that you're going to meet over the course of this special crossover episode featuring some of your favorite weather podcasts from across your feeds. We've got the Joe and Joe Weather Show. We've got Stormfront Freaks. We got Weather Brains. We got the Weather Lounge. We got Chaser Chat. Some of you are joining us right now live on YouTube and Facebook. And if you are, you're invited to join our conversation by asking a question or sharing a comment as we go through this live broadcast. Some of you may be listening to this show later on as a part of your favorite podcast feed. And so we invite you to check out the description for links to all of the shows we just mentioned here. We're going to have fun over the course of the next little bit, guys. So glad you're all here. I really think this speaks to the collaboration we see in the weather community as a whole. Whether it's during severe weather or during forecasting, the whole spirit of weather in this country is to collaborate, share data, share science. And that's why all of these shows that could just as easily be competitors are here together now for the shared love of the science that you all, our audience, do enjoy. In just a moment, we're going to start with James Spann of Weather Brains, but we also do want to mention that a large portion of our country is continuing to clean up from the recent tornado outbreak across portions of the Deep South. If you're able to help, we encourage you to donate to an organization like the American Red Cross at redcross.org to help all of those impacted by the ongoing severe weather aftermath in portions of our country. Let's start with James Spann, who is in Birmingham, Alabama, and was pretty close to the severe weather outbreak that we saw recently. And unfortunately, James, probably more storms yet ahead this severe weather season. So before we talk to you about Weather Brains, let me talk to you about storms. How is everyone in your neck of Alabama doing? And we know this impacted states like Mississippi as well and other portions of the South. So I wanted to start with that here tonight as we bring you into the show.
It was a rough ride this weekend. Of course, Mississippi had the brunt of the deaths. We had one fatality here, and it was in a mobile home, and that's one of our biggest struggles. It's doing better for people that live in manufactured housing. All of us, we have to do better. We had one death, but we had huge hail that produced a lot of damage. That really didn't get a lot of attention, and we had major flooding problems. So it was a wild weekend, and we're gearing up for another all-nighter Friday night. I think I had 3 all-nighters in a row. We've got one coming up Friday night. But, you know, this is March and April. This is what we do here. It is, I will never, ever, ever gripe about the lack of sleep. I've not slept since 1973, and I love coming to work every day. So, you know, it's just what I do.
Well, we appreciate as colleagues, but as audience members and community members, all that you do, both on Weather Brains and on ABC 33 and 40, trying to keep everyone safe. And I think if I can speak on behalf of meteorologists across the country, we try to emulate exactly what it is that you do so well, both on air and online. So let's talk a little bit about Weather Brains, because as I think I told you the last time you were with us on the Carolina Weather Group, I kind of see you as the godfather of weather podcasts. We're all kind of imitating what you have started. Take us back. I'd have to imagine most people who are listening to us right now on any one of our shows probably is familiar with your show. But if they are not, what year did you start it and why did you start it?
The year was 2006, and I don't even think most people knew what a podcast was. I'm an early adopter. Early adopters get the good Twitter handles and the Gmail addresses and all that, but I need a creative outlet. For those that don't know, for what I do, it's pretty hard. I work from 4 to midnight every day. And that's not an exaggeration during the week. It's not quite as bad on weekends. And everybody needs a little bit of time just to relax and to talk and to, you know, express yourself other than a 30-second radio cut or a 3-minute television weathercast or whatever. And so we discovered this new platform in 2006. And so we started it, and we never intended on anybody to listen to the show. And it was just audio. We had no video back then. And we haven't missed a week, to my knowledge. Now, I'll take a week off from time to time. We'll do 2 shows in a week. So I think we're approaching episode number 900. So that's our standard line. Listen, we're not the best show. You got this slick looking graphics here. I mean, this is good stuff. This is professional. We just get on there and have fun, and we don't really worry about and I like what you said too. There's no competition here. None whatsoever. We want everybody to be successful that does a weather podcast. We all need to learn that I need to learn something every day. And all of these shows are outstanding. But now we've grown from originally we just had me and a couple of others. And now we've got some pretty cool regulars on the show every week. We've got Dr. Neil Jacobs. Neil was the administrator of NOAA. Kim Cloko-McLean, who is probably the most renowned social scientist involving meteorology. James ate a lot. James is great. James is in Tulsa. Troy Kimmel, who's down in Austin, Texas. We have Jen Naramore, that's up near Columbus, Ohio. Bill Murray, who's down here in this part of the world with me. And we just like to bring on guests and talk and learn. So it's just a way to express ourselves. And I love the fact that we don't have some jabroni guy in my ear yelling, rap. We could just talk. We don't have a firm out time. We just talk until we get tired.
Yeah, the only person in my ear here tonight is you guys, which is good news. I think you're right. I think we all have so much fun doing that, and I think that's what brings so much of us back. I can't speak for the other shows. My show, no one gets paid, and we're just coming back to do it out of love. So, James, let me ask you this question. You mentioned at your show you've learned a lot. You've had a lot of guests on over 900 episodes. I will put you on the spot. What is the first thing that comes to mind when I say, what is the most interesting thing you've learned while conducting an interview with a guest?
I think the most important thing I've learned is that what we do is not enough. My background is physical science. That's all I know. My first major in college was electrical engineering. And then I finished in meteorology. I have never taken a single class in communication or human behavior. And I was born to be standing in front of a green wall when there are tornadoes flying. It is my purpose in life, I believe, to mitigate loss of life during tornado events here. And I learned through our guests over the years that we don't know a lot about human behavior. And by golly, we better listen. And I think the other thing I've learned is humility. A lot of times you just get especially for old, guys like me, we've been doing it for 100 years. You think you know it all. No, you don't. In fact, I would suggest by doing Weather Brains, I've learned how much I don't know. And so having that Monday night event every week, it's critical education for me. I don't get the CEUs for the AMS SEAL or these other things, the CBN, but by golly, it's important to me. And so I've learned humility. I've learned how to listen. I've learned that what I know is not enough, especially involving social science and human behavior. So having a Kim McLean on the show and having guests that deal in social science, that's critical. And those that deal with physical science. Goodness, having Dr. Jacobs. Neil Jacobs is the NWP czar, numerical weather prediction. And all of us, every weather dweeb in the world, talks about models. Hey, man, what's the Euro do? What about the GFS and all this? He understands the physics better than anybody else on the planet. And having him on the show to help navigate through circumstances and different case studies, it's really good. So I think the most important thing for all these shows here is the fact that we can learn something and at the same time have fun and laugh. If you can't laugh, we have no hope. And I think most folks here have a sense of humor and we can deliver content in a fun way.
I think laughing helps keep us sane. We'll say hello to Timothy, who's watching with us on YouTube during this live chat, saying good afternoon and good evening to all of us here, including the two Jameses, Phil, Joe, Mike, and Gabriel. I'm going to ask in a moment for some questions from the other folks and the other shows who are joining us who maybe would like an opportunity, James, to ask you a question directly. Before I do that, you've got the 1,000th show on the horizon. What do you envision for that? And is there one big guest that you've not been able to snag yet that you really want to snag?
Holy cow.
We figured for 1,000, we'll probably take it to Norman, to the National Weather Center. We've done a live show out of there before. It was that show was the most bizarre show we've ever done. We were live in the auditorium. If you've ever been to the National Weather Center, it's down in the basement. And they put me down there with Chuck Doswell. And I think most people that are older know Dr. Doswell. He's taught me more about severe local convective storms than any other human being on the planet. The man is brilliant. But Chuck can be, he's an interesting personality. But anyway, I won't get into the details of that. But one of the thoughts is to do show 1000 there at the National Weather Center. And I should mention Rick Smith, of course, is on our show. Rick's the WCM of the Weather Service in Norman. And, since everybody's there, or we've had thoughts of doing it at a barbecue joint in Memphis or Kansas City. I don't know. But we want to do it live, and we're going to bring in everybody together because like everybody else here, we do it virtually, which is fine. But every once in a while, I think it's good to be together. And, I really missed the conferences during the COVID stuff. In fact, I'm back on the speaking tour. I was at Ohio State at their symposium this year, and I was scheduled to be in Iowa last week, but I couldn't go because of the severe weather. But being back around friends and just talking in person, there's something healing about that. And I think that's the other thing, too, that we've really tried to talk about a little more in recent years. It's mental health. We've got a mental health problem in this country. And the truth is every family has mental health issues, everybody. And everybody in the weather enterprise, at some point, if you do this long enough, you will encounter some event that will trigger some type of mental health issue in your life. And to be able to be around friends and talk, there's something just healing about that. So, yeah, we'll do show 1000 somewhere. I would prefer to do it at a barbecue joint. So we'll probably find one somewhere, or the National Weather Center, or maybe we'll bring in barbecue at the National Weather Center. I don't know.
I think mental health is important. And I know you and I and some other folks at the Carolina Weather Group had a chance to talk about that when we were privileged enough to have you on probably more than a year ago now to talk about the April 27th, 2011 tornado outbreak. And you're absolutely right. That's one of those things that I think I have learned a lot about, as you mentioned, social science, also the mental health and the fatigue that goes into doing this as a forecaster, but also as a community member when you're constantly maybe going through kind of a training one system after another. We haven't had a chance yet in our program tonight to get to meet all of the other lovely shows out there, but I know we have James Spann for just a few more minutes here, and Phil Johnson from Stormfront Freaks came off mute, and I thought maybe, Phil, you had a question for James before he had to go here tonight.
No, I just said, holy cow, 1,000. That was mind-blowing.
It's about time to stop, probably. I mean, we need an exit strategy.
Well, so that's my question, James, is so you've been doing this now almost 1,000 episodes. What and you talked about how you like keeping it pretty low key, nothing too fancy. But what would you say? Do you have any goals in the horizon with Weather Brains? Anything new you'd like to do with it?
Well, I think, and listen, I'm people all the time, they ask me, when am I going to retire? Never. I will drop dead doing this show or on that green wall or something. I just can't. The minute I stop, I'll be dead within 6 months. So, as long as I'm here and if I've got the energy and the cognitive skill, I'm still going to do this. And instead of worrying about production value, you guys are, all these shows, everybody on this show here, your production value is so much better than ours. I mean, I come in here, 10 minutes before airtime and just hit the button and go. And, your production value is great. I think we probably need to improve that a little bit. But still, my main thing is just to keep increasing the quality of guests that we bring on the show, where we can learn and laugh. And again, the things, goodness, the guest quality has gotten pretty good. And we did tackle some of the hard topics. We brought Ryan Hall on the show, and half the people said, I'll never watch your show again, you bunch of sleazeballs. And the other half is, this is the greatest show you've ever done. But I think it's important to bring on people like that, to let them talk and, just to air it out. And we're probably going to do a Storm Chase deal. And all of y'all have done Storm Chase episodes, and we have. But lately, this yin-yang stuff on the Twitter, it's not healthy. And I'd like to kind of, if anything, facilitate maybe just bringing some people together. But no, I'm not going to worry about the production. I'll let you guys do the slick production. We're just going to keep trying to bring on quality guests. And guys, I hate to go, but I've talked way too much here. But I've got to go open the 6 o'clock. The 6 o'clock news starts now. We're still doing Ron Burgundy newscast here. Good evening. Good evening. I don't believe you. So I've got to go open it up. But again, for all of our Weather Brains folks, be sure and check out all these other great shows. I mean, we always say we're the oldest weather podcast in the universe, but we're not the best one. The best ones are here on this show. So thank you guys for letting me come on tonight. And I'll be listening. I'll hang up and I'll be listening. And we'll put this up on our stream, on the Weather Brain stream later. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, James. That's James Spann, Weather Brains, and he's going to go open the 6 o'clock news there on ABC 33 and 40. It's always great to talk to him. Phil, we just had your mic open, so let's roll right on down over to you. Talk a little bit about Stormfront Freaks. You guys have a great show. I've listened many a times. I think you guys also sometimes do a segment where, and I'm jealous of this, so this is why I'm bringing it up. I think you guys will play a game about who's drinking, right? I wish I had something right now. All I have is water.
We started, James, in 2016. So 10 years after Weather Brains had already begun. And when we started the show and when I had the idea, I had just started listening to podcasts and certainly had a strong interest in weather. And I thought, this might be something really kind of neat to explore. So I actually, at that point, so this was in early 2016, I looked to see what was out there. And I really saw 2 podcasts that were currently active, still producing shows. And that was, of course, Weather Brains and Carolina Weather Group. And so I thought, well, and my idea was certainly to create an entertaining podcast, weather podcast, which when you're talking science can sometimes certainly be a challenge to create something that's entertaining. So our philosophy is really to create kind of a late night talk show, Tonight Show kind of format where we bring in, usually have a primary guest in on the show that could have any background or connection to weather, but something that I always feel is really interesting or sexy or, something fun. And then we also will tend to have some really funny or strange segments following the guest. We have hashtag Weather Fools. We've done a number of bizarre things from weather resources, which can be good and educational, to we'll slow down the audio of some of our weather friends that many of you are familiar with. We'll slow down the audio and edit it a little bit and make it sound like they're a little intoxicated while they're giving their interview or their weather. Just kind of fun stuff that we tend to do. But when we started this in spring of 2016, there were, of course, all of a sudden, within a matter of a couple of months, probably 3 or 4 more weather podcasts that had started at the same time. And none of those are still currently producing episodes, but that's where the whole National Weather Podcast Month idea came from, right? Was to bring all these independent weather podcasts together and help promote each other, share ideas with each other and all of that. But yeah, our show, we like to have a lot of fun. You talked about the drinking. That's how we introduce the show for the most part, is because we'll have co-hosts from various areas of weather. We have professional storm chasers. We've got Skywarn County coordinators. We have meteorologists on the broadcasting end, on the digital side, just to kind of give a little variety of topics and make sure we have different viewpoints as we're talking about things. But the best way to introduce that voice to an audio podcast is we find out what everybody's drinking tonight. And so it's just kind of a fun way to let people know we like to have a good time on this show. We've actually had a comment once on Apple Podcasts, came back and the comment was, "Is this a drinking podcast?" And I kind of responded, yeah, it kind of is that too. It kind of is that too.
Yeah, you mentioned, first of all, to give credit where credit's due, National Weather Podcast Month is something that came out of your show, and you extended that first, I'll say, olive branch to all the rest of us. But you also mentioned how shows over the years have come and gone, and I think that does speak to, speaking frankly, the amount of work, how grueling it can be. Sometimes you get not so nice comments. Sometimes you're burning that midnight oil. And so, I mean, even in trying to book this show this year, we were noticing new shows or shows that maybe had gone on hiatus. Your show, I think, has encouraged our show over the Carolina Weather Group to try to have more fun, looking at the way you guys are doing and trying to learn right from the other shows around us. You mentioned you guys have had some really big guests on, and I'm curious to know, Phil, is there a guest who you've had on, and maybe you haven't said this out loud, but you go, I can't actually believe that we booked them and they came on. I never thought that was actually going to happen.
Well, and you probably know, I mean, and everybody on here knows, when you start this thing, you're just kind of reaching out to people maybe you know, or know of, to kind of help you out. I mean, our first few shows, our first show was some physicist that we had on from a company that was designing this machine that is supposed to detect tornadoes through electrical energy, kind of a thing. And I thought, well, that sounds kind of interesting. And so, but it was a physicist, and you can imagine how that conversation went, no matter how many beers you might have had. To eventually, it's been, James, a lot of reaching that olive branch out to people in the weather community that you've mentioned. And James Spann has mentioned this community is a great community, and everybody's looking to help each other out. I mentioned Carolina Weather Group was around before we started, and so we've learned a lot from you guys as well. But it has been fun to have the Ginger Z's and the Jim Cantoris and the Reed Timmers, and we just had the director James Winterstern of the Supercell movie. We just had him on the show for the second time. We had him on a year ago talking about the movie, but it was just released, and so that was enjoyable. And this next episode we have coming up is an on-air meteorologist, Jason Frazier from Fox Weather. So that the new 24/7 Fox Weather broadcasting streaming channel that's come out. We're going to find out a little bit about how they got started and what that's all about. So it's been fun to make connections, and it's been enjoyable, as you all know, as you make these connections through the podcast. When I go out storm chasing and doing those things, to meet these people that I've never met before or I've met virtually during a show, it's always a great time. Always fun.
It's funny, you mentioned Fox Weather, James mentioned Ryan Hall, and as we think back to all the things that have changed since 2016, Phil, could you imagine in 2016 if somebody was like, oh yeah, there's going to be this Ryan Hall Y'all channel, and Fox is going to come out with a 24/7 streaming channel? Like, just how much the landscape has changed for weather as a whole in the last couple of years is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I'm actually, I won't lie to you, I'm at this point with our podcast, because we are primarily an audio podcast. We do some video, but not a lot. I'm actually at a point to where I'm rethinking our strategy. Should the audio podcast be our primary media outlet, or should we be looking at other video outlets? You mentioned briefly earlier, I think before we started the show, Jen Walton from Girls Who Chase had started a podcast recently, but they've already decided to kind of go a different route. So that's great. It's a great point you bring up, is even as audio podcasting, is that the future?
I think that's a great point, and I feel like we're always constantly trying to evolve and pivot. I feel like I have a face for radio or a face for podcasts. You've got a nice backdrop here. I think you're ready to, if you wanted to emphasize the video front, you're already well lit, and you obviously got the microphone equipment. Let me ask you this, Phil, for anybody that's maybe listening to this and on the fence about starting their own podcast, about weather or about something else. We've talked a lot about how hard it is. But from an equipment and an accessibility standpoint, have you found with Stormfront Freaks that it costs a lot of money to start a show, or have you found that maybe it wasn't as scary as you thought that was going to be?
No, to me, it was fun. I mean, there was certainly a learning curve there, right? If you listen to any of our earlier shows, they don't nearly sound as good and produced as they do now. As over the last, we're going almost 7 years now, it's been upgrading, constantly upgrading, learning new things, getting better at it. It's just like anything, right? When you start, it's pathetic, but you start anyway and you have fun with it. And I think that's the goal. The challenge, you talk about how hard it might be. I think that's for me, it's the creativity side of things. James Spann talked about it's a creative outlet, and there really is that for me as well. But, there are just times that your creativity, you gotta turn it on because you have a show to do and create, and you got to figure out what kind of segments we're going to do and who's going to do what. And I got to find stuff and come up with game shows, and I got to find what beer I'm going to be drinking this week. The creativity can be a challenge at times. But for me, one of the benefits is we have co-hosts. It's not just a solo act. And that's what's helped me get through times that I don't feel as creative, or I don't feel as into it. Someone else on our team might. or multiple people might, and I can work off of their energy and kind of help me get through that time period.
I'm going to ask Jared Smith, who is our director tonight on this show from the Carolina Weather Group, to put us all in the Brady Bunch squares here for just a moment, because I want to do a show of hands with the other guys we have on from the other shows here with us tonight, Mike, Gabriel, Joe, and Phil, you as well. By a show of hands, does anyone's show just do audio? Okay.
I'm kind of
the Weather Lounge kind of went so.
Yeah, mostly audio, but we do dabble in video from time to time.
So let me ask this question. Does anyone just do video, which obviously has audio, but I mean, like, you don't distribute the audio as a part of an RSS feed?
I'm not sure on my end, because the technical person is my partner, Joe Cioffi, and he's on virtually every social media platform, Patreon and YouTube and Facebook. So I'm sure that in some cases there are situations where you'll just hear us and not see us. But again, we get a lot of our viewership indeed from being on YouTube.
Yeah. YouTube's a huge discovery for us here at the Carolina Weather Group. And we're keeping in mind that some folks may just be listening and can't see where I'm pointing or which hands are going up in the air. Let me go back over to Mike from the Weather Lounge. We haven't had a chance yet to talk about your show, but let's start here, Mike. Why is it that audio is what you guys kind of focus on, and what have you guys been toying with in that department, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, well, we started with audio because the company I work for, WeatherWorks, we started our whole business in radio to begin with. And we had some audio equipment around, and we thought that was the easiest means to get the podcast going. We felt that, video would be a little bit too complicated for us to get out to the masses of the people. So that's why we just stuck with audio. We thought, okay, well, what's the easiest way we can do this? Because basically how our show came to be is that we talked about it for a few years, actually several years before we actually launched. But we launched back in August of 2020. And obviously that's when we had the COVID pandemic going on. And we were just looking for another way that we can engage our audience or engage people with the weather. And we were all kind of stuck at home and didn't know really what to do with all the lockdowns and things like that going on. So we said, you know what, we can do this from home. We can just get on our desktop computers, we can get some audio equipment, and we can get this done. And our guy Mike Priante there did a great job figuring out on how to get this up and how to get it running for us. He's basically our technical guy and our editor and things like that. And then my co-host Brad Miller, he also helped out a whole lot because he's typically a co-host with me on the show. So we keep things light that way. We have a lot of banter back and forth.
August of 2020 was probably about the time, Mike, where I no longer had to explain to our guests what Zoom was or how Zoom worked. Because I like to say we were using Zoom before it was cool. But
absolutely,
technology did change, and I do think that's one of the things that I suppose for the better, people became more used to this notion of not everything has to look super polished. Tell us a little bit more about your show, Micah. What can viewers, or I guess I should say listeners, expect out of the Weather Lounge if they haven't had a chance to listen to you yet?
Well, we're trying to have fun. We're trying to be laid back about it. I really like the Stormfront Freaks idea about having a drink with the podcast. I mean, I remember seeing that and I was thinking to myself, I just don't know if my boss would like that. So we're going to have to kind of back away from that for the time being. But I do like that idea, that's for sure. But yeah, we like to be laid back about it. And, we like to relate the weather to how it affects people's lives, how it affects different companies, different job duties. So from that, we've had guests ranging from the director of grounds for the Philadelphia Eagles and how they deal with the weather. We've talked to military colonels on how the weather affects their operations on the battlefield. We've talked to the hurricane hunters, climatologists, Dr. Richard Alley from Penn State University. He was one of my professors. And even the director, Jamie Winterstern, that you guys mentioned, we talked to about the Supercell movie. So, we had I honestly got to say that I'm pretty much floored that all you have to do is really reach out and ask. And people are more willing to do these interviews on podcasts than you really do think. And if anybody's out there looking to start a podcast, just go for it. Just try it. Just ask. You'll be surprised how many people actually say yes. So don't think that they're going to automatically say no. Don't have that in your head. It's amazing what you guys can really accomplish.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback off of that if I can, Mike. For anyone who's watching or listening and thinking about starting their own show, I have had the same experience where guests will say yes. And I think they're just so excited to share and talk. They don't really care if it's 100 people or 1,000 people or 10 people who might be watching and listening. These are really, we want the shows to be entertaining. We want the shows to be insightful, but really it's just a bunch of friends hanging out at the end of the day. And I think people are anxious to be a part of that. You mentioned all of the great ways that weather has intersected with everyday life. You mentioned baseball here in Charlotte. The Charlotte Knights, our minor league team, are getting ready for their opening night on Friday. Really getting reminded myself about okay, we got some rain in the forecast. So how do they prepare the field and when do they call it if there's lightning too close? So let me ask you, in the interviews that you've had an opportunity to do, Mike, have you walked away with, wow, I learned something new here tonight that I wasn't expecting that has really stuck with you when it comes to that intersection of weather and everyday life?
I would say the thing that really stood out to me is when I talked to a colonel in the Army, and I just didn't realize, I knew that, weather would affect any type of large operations. You see things from history with D-Day and the weather around history or weather surrounding that and how that affected the plan. But just in their everyday operations, he was really into ballistics. I think he had I forget what it was, a battalion or something like that to do with ballistics. So they have to basically shoot, their projectile 20 miles away and hit a 100-yard target across and be accurate, or even closer than that, I believe. And in order to hit that, they have to calculate what the winds are doing at the surface, what the winds are doing aloft, if there's any clouds in the area. I mean, it's amazing all the calculations they have to do in order to get that on target. And I think that was really impressive to me, that how much that affects things. And not only that, but it was with their equipment, with their night vision things. The certain temperature fluctuations would really mess with their night vision. And it's just amazing that is all involved and incorporated with the military.
This is the producer and me speaking out loud now, Mike. But as you were talking, I was thinking about a similar application. And there's a podcast for this one, too. So, Phil, write this one down for next year. Fantasy football weather guys incorporate some of what you were just talking about, Mike, right? What's in the atmosphere? How heavy is the air? Which way is the wind blowing? And how, in their case, you actually stack your football lineup.
That's a good point, actually. And we do have a guest coming up on the Weather Lounge in the next couple of weeks. His name is Ryan Ripken, and he does this basically. He incorporates weather into fantasy sports. So not only was he a minor league player and things like that, so we want to get his perspective on how the weather affected his playing days, but it's also impacting his fantasy interests. So it's really interesting. I'm curious to see how that all pans out.
I know, as we gear up for the baseball season and the amount of pure volume of games that they play and how often weather intersects with all of them. Good stuff, Mike. Before we go tonight, in case anyone at home is trying to frantically write these down, we'll go back through all the shows and where you can find and listen to them. I want to go to Gabriel next, as we were talking about audio podcasts, but I want to start with a question about the name of your show, Chaser Chat, because I'm wondering if you guys deal with something we deal with at the Carolina Weather Group, which is our name is very specific. So people who are not in the Carolinas might think, why would I ever want to listen to that show? I don't live there. And we always are trying to overcome it with branding that says, no, it's a show about weather science and technology from the Carolinas, but it's for everyone. So for Chaser Chat, for anyone who's not familiar, is it a show geared exclusively towards chasers, or is it about chasing but would appeal to anybody?
Well, first off, I just want to say thank you very much for allowing me this opportunity to come on the show. It's been really awesome getting to hear from everybody. So just really appreciative of that. And to answer your question, it is definitely a show for anybody who is, I would say, peripherally interested in the weather, because even though it's called Chaser Chat and it does more or less specifically target people who storm chase, we have such a wide variety. I say we like there's more than one person. I have a lot of guests on the show. For instance, one week I might have Pecos Hank or Ryan Hall on, and the next week I might have somebody who is an immunologist. That just to think of a recent episode that we had to talk about bacterial and fungal infections that can occur after severe weather events, specifically tornadoes and the ensuing infections that happen after that. So it's definitely something where if you are a storm chaser, you're probably going to be a little more interested in it, because at the end of each episode, we're always taking everything back to storm chasing and talking about whether it's, a younger person who's only got a chance to chase locally or a person who has been chasing professionally. We always take it back to that. But there's certainly a lot of people. Another one that comes to mind is Dr. Lee Orff and his supercell simulations that he's been doing. We had him on, and that actually, strangely enough, was the most listened to episode of all time, about 2.5 years ago. And he, I don't believe, has ever chased a single storm. And all we did was talk about what is happening within computer models. So definitely something there for everybody.
I have not chased, at least with any diligence, an actual storm cell other than ones that are on my computer screen, which I will jokingly circle back to with you. But I want to know about the origin of your show. Are you a chaser? And then thus this is what inspired you to start making a podcast about it?
So I have actually been in broadcasting now for a little over 15 years in one form or another. And I've always also been very interested in the weather, but because of scheduling limitations and just not really knowing where to find any resources, it was really just sort of a local hobby. I knew what a hook echo was. I watched some of Skip Talbot's videos so that I could actually identify what a supercell looked like in the sky. So if anything came locally around Columbus, Ohio, a little bit to the west out there near Dayton and those areas, I'd go out and I'd take a peek, and never really saw too much of interest, but it was something that I liked a lot. Now, flash forward to the beginning of the pandemic, and this actually was something that I've noticed as a recurring theme with a lot of my guests, that people basically were sitting at home with a ton of time on their hands and no real idea of what they were going to do. And so it feels like a lot of people collectively just decided, hey, I've always kind of liked to look at clouds. I think I'm going to actually take this a little more seriously. So I was able to hook up with a couple of folks who gave me some private lessons on forecasting and how it applies to storm chasing. I read a couple of textbooks, and also I joined the Twitter community, the WX Twitter community, which has just been absolutely phenomenal. The amount of knowledge sharing that people are happy to give has just blown me away. It's got to be one of the most welcoming communities that I've ever been a part of. And out of that just grew this idea of, hey, well, I've got this broadcasting background. I'm really interested in the weather now, even more so than I was when I was younger. And I'm meeting lots of interesting people. I think it's about time we start a storm chasing podcast that focuses on that aspect of things, because I saw there were a lot of podcasts out there, the ones that we've heard from on this show being prime examples. But I didn't seem to find one that was specifically dedicated to, I guess you could say, the storm chasing community. And that's how this show began.
I think that's what's so great about our landscape is any sort of niche that you're interested in, not only can you learn about it, but now there's shows and productions about it all, whether they're podcasts or they're YouTube channels. Why have you guys found that audio is the best delivery mechanism for you guys?
Well, first of all, if you take a look, face made for radio right here. So there's no denying that. And second of all, I've done a lot of video broadcasting in the past. There actually was a time where podcasting and live streaming was my full-time job. And I found that you tend to get a little bit more of a relaxed atmosphere when you're doing just audio. And that's really the goal that I was striving for with Chaser Chat. For those of you out there who are considering listening to the show, I had two primary influences for it. I listen to a lot of podcasts myself, about 10 to 15 hours a day, I'd say. It's not like the actual hours. I listen to everything on 2 to 3 times speed. So I probably listen to about 4 or 5 actual hours of podcasts. And there were 2 shows in particular. One is the Joe Rogan Experience. I love how the conversations are just open and free flowing. Like there's not a script or any sort of scheduling that goes into it. It's just let's ask some random questions and see where the conversation goes. And then there's a show called Other People's Lives, where lots of people who are just absolutely ordinary in every other way, you wouldn't think anything special about them. They have maybe 1 or 2 aspects of their lives that are super interesting. And so these 2 hosts go out, they find these people, they bring them on, and it's some random anonymous person. In fact, a lot of the people even choose to remain anonymous. They talk to them and they just have this wonderful hour and a half long conversation about some random topic from some random person you might have met on the street, and you would have never known that this person had this just really interesting thing about them that you could talk for hours about. So those 2 podcasts influenced me. I wanted to create something that would just be a long form, free flowing conversation. And I have this idea that everybody is more interesting than they think they are. So once you get somebody comfortable, you kind of get past the preamble, you ask a few questions, you have a couple of laughs. I find that people really open up. They're willing to start sharing things, and they realize, I think, along with you at the same time, that they actually have a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. And so that's the specific reason for audio only, but I'm definitely not opposed to doing things with video in the future.
Sometimes it's interesting as a host, right, to try to convince somebody they have an interesting story. We're like, we think you're interesting. Right? Please say more about that.
Yeah, people always say, just real quick, people always say, I'm sorry if I'm rambling. And I always tell them, like, no, that's what a podcast is for. Please continue talking. Like, just don't stop.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And I couldn't help but probably acknowledge to Phil that, if he's listening at 2 or 3 times speed, but you're slowing down the segments to make them sound funny, that probably cancels itself out.
Yeah, that ruins that segment out for Gabriel. Yeah.
But I have heard every single one of you here sound like chipmunks. So I just have to throw that out there.
I probably sound more interesting as a chipmunk because I don't think I sound interesting otherwise. So let me bring Joe in here real fast. Joe, you've got some folks who are watching. They're watching with us tonight here on Facebook and on YouTube. And I think it was Rock Doc who was asking whether or not you have a new episode out tonight or tomorrow, or when's the next Joe and Joe Weather Show drop. So since I think we're simulcasting on your YouTube channel right now, I thought maybe you could address that directly.
I can address that. Joe Cioffi, my cohort on Joe and Joe, is in Florida. Actually, I believe tonight he is commuting back home from Florida. And so no Joe and Joe show tonight, but we will be back as we normally are during the week, except for Friday nights, unless there's something special going on a Friday. Monday through Thursday, we're on from 7:35 Eastern time to usually about 8:35. We usually go at least an hour on our show. And then we take off on Friday and Saturday. And then we're back on Sunday, but not in the evening. We're on at 11 o'clock in the morning, and we call that segment Coffee with Joe and Joe in the early part of the day. And we have a lot of fun. We have about, I'd say about 200 hardcore viewers that watch us on a regular basis. But when there's something significant about to occur, like a major winter storm or the approach of maybe a tropical cyclone or a hurricane, we see our numbers rise. We have seen on our chat board numbers on the order of 400 and even 600. And once we even touched 1,000 viewers, and that's not including those who are not on the chat board. We have a lot of lurkers out there who aren't necessarily on the chat board, but are watching us nonetheless. So it makes Joe and I feel viable. We no longer, the two of us have about 40 years experience each in broadcasting, both on radio and television. And unfortunately, at least up here in the New York market, they don't seem to be interested in people of our age or our experience. So we are doing our show on YouTube. It makes us feel viable because we know that there are a lot of people out there who tune in every night, even during boring periods of weather, just to hear us and talk about weather.
Well, I'm exhausted just thinking about all of those hours that you guys are doing as you were rattling off that schedule. I can't believe it's only one day a week that you're doing Who's Drinking What Coffee. But I will compliment what you said on that. I think the viewer, the listener at home, and if you're listening to me right now, this is where your big part comes in, plays a role in feeding that energy back into us. Right? If we're just doing this as show creators out of the love and enjoyment of doing it, it's those who are coming into the chat, as you mentioned, Joe, and engaging with us that make it so lively and so enjoyable, I think.
I think so, too. The interesting thing about, I'm usually the one who monitors the chat board. Joe is the one who, Joe Cioffi, is the one, my partner, who usually operates everything. He's like the switcher, if you will, putting up maps from places such as Tropical Tidbits, for example, or from the National Weather Service site, SPC, WPC sites. He puts those maps up. And sometimes I'll join in since I'm on Zoom, I could share whatever I'm thinking or whatever I'm looking at with not just Joe, but also everybody on the chat board. And sometimes it can get rather interesting. Sometimes there'll be people on the chat board who will have a different opinion as to what may be coming our way weather-wise from what Joe is indicating or what from I'm indicating. And we have a little bit of a discussion with that. But I have found it very interesting. I look forward to the shows each night and being able to interact with so many different people and being able to interact with Joe. Joe and I, we grew up on the Upper East Side in Harlem, in Manhattan, back in the day. We went to the same Catholic school, although we didn't know each other back then. And then our families moved up to the Throgs next section of the Bronx. We still didn't know each other. It wasn't until we landed at the same college, City College, in New York on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, that we got to know each other. We used to hang out at the weather station, the weather center there, got to know each other very, very well. And then we went our own separate ways. I ended up on radio. Joe ended up working as a behind-the-scenes person for people like Willard Scott and Al Roker at NBC4, and also worked for a time as an intern at the National Weather Service. The one thing we always wanted to do was work together at the same location. And he got a job at News 12, which was a cable vision outlet out on Long Island. I kept trying to get into News 12. I eventually got in as a stringer. Then Joe left and went to Pix 11 here in New York, and I was at News 12. Finally, in 2017, we both landed at the same place. We were at Verizon Fios One News, and we were there for about 3 years until that shut down in November of 2019. And after it shut down, I said to Joe, well, that's it. It's been fun being together with each other. He said, no. We're going to figure out how we're going to still be able to do this together. And sure enough, we're doing it each night. He is no longer in New York. He's down in Georgia. And I'm up here in New York, just north of New York City. And yet every night, through the magic of technology and through the magic of Zoom, we're able to appear side by side together with a whole bunch of people on the chat board. And we have a lot of fun talking again about weather and other things too. We finish out our shows most nights with what we call Briller Jeopardy. One of our moderators is a gentleman who we call the chairman, Scott Briller, and he comes up with a number of different interesting questions, not necessarily in weather, but in other subjects as well. And we'll throw them out to the chat board, and I'll throw them out to Joe, or Joe will throw them out to me. And that's usually how we finish out our shows each night with a bit of fun. So it's not really all weather, it's other things as well.
You talk a little bit, I'm going to jump in, James, because he was talking about Zoom, and you were mentioning that earlier, right? Where prior to COVID, how many times we would have to explain to our guests kind of how to use, this kind of a Zoom call kind of situation and what to do and how to log in and headphones and unmute yourself, all that good stuff. James, I want to go to you because we really haven't had a chance to talk a whole lot about Carolina Weather Group yet. You mentioned certainly, and I think that's important for everybody to know, that you don't have to be interested in Carolina weather to certainly learn and benefit and enjoy your show. But talking about Zoom, I guess, tell us, when did you guys start? How did you start this scenario and start your show? But you really have, I've seen you guys really do a big push towards video and have done some really good things there. So I don't know if there was a point that you guys decided to start going that route.
Yeah, I think that's a good question, Phil, and I appreciate that because if my wife was here, she would confirm I like talking about myself. So thanks for the question. We're in our 9th season, and fun fact, I didn't even start when it started. I got invited on a few years in just to show how collaborative these things can be. And when we started, we were on Google Hangouts, and it was just like a straight, raw chat. I don't think there was an audio element to it. It went to YouTube. I'm not even sure it went to Facebook. There wasn't really this idea that we were trying to hit these people in all these different places yet. And it was just really, the genesis was broadcast Mets and enthusiasts, Skywarn watchers, ham radio operators in the Carolinas would get together and discuss the weather. It was like the interactive version of the National Weather Service forecast discussion. And then that evolved more into a show. And then at some point, I guess it was 2016 or so, I think I joined. And that was around the time we were trying to then reach an even broader audience. We want to try to appeal to maybe parents and teachers and kids who want to learn, but also still be relevant to people who are experts in the field and try to teach them something new as well too. And that's where we, I think, have really ballooned now to try to do video, because that is, you think about the YouTube algorithm, and I'm sure the Joe and Joe Weather Show have seen this too. YouTube is such a powerful tool paired with Google to try to reach new audiences that at least I am surprised with the people who show up. All of a sudden, we got people watching from California or Kansas or other countries. And that's really why we try to embrace, yes, our brand is Carolina Weather Group. When there's a hurricane or severe weather in the Carolinas, that's what comes first for us. And while we are, as co-hosts, all spread across the Carolinas, we do try to make shows that are really relevant to everyone. And a perfect example of this recently is our show got invited down to go to Kennedy Space Center in Florida for a space launch. What did that have to do with the weather in the Carolinas? Really nothing, other than we all like watching things in the sky. And there's this huge overlap between technology and space and weather.
That looked great. I want to know a little bit more about that, because who all went down? I saw a lot of your stuff and your reports from there, but who all went down and what was that experience like?
So it was just me, which was a very interesting experience. It felt a little like Willy Wonka and the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory thing, where they were like, here is your one golden ticket. It is just for you. And it was like, okay. So if I were to ever get invited back again, I would probably try to really say, but can I please bring help? Because I shot everything on my phone using little DJI mics. There are microphones from other companies as well too, which really I think speaks, Phil, to how far technology has come. Because we shot the whole thing, both the live elements and what I essentially now lovingly calling the documentary version of it as well too, in 4K on the phone with wireless mics that captured right into the phone or streamed us out over 4G, 5G, and Wi-Fi, which is just, it blows my mind. First of all, talking about, and this was something Joe brought up, people behind the scenes pushing buttons. In his case, it's the other Joe. In my case, it's Jared Smith. Jared, can you turn your camera back on so we can see your pretty face? Because there he is. This is the man who not only tonight has been pushing the buttons, moving people around the screen, but also is the man who made my dream of the Kennedy Space Center stream happen, Phil, is because that man was back in front of his computer making me look not dumb.
Nice. Nice. Well done, Jared. Because he didn't look dumb. He looked pretty smart. So that was good.
And it was a team effort. We have a video editor who is in New Jersey. What does that have to do with the Carolinas? Nothing. He's just a great, excellent, smart young man. And he was taking in all of the video that I was about to say we, as Gabriel did in the Royal Sensor Chaser chat, that we were sending back, that I was sending back. So the videos were going from Florida to New Jersey, Florida to Charlotte to New Jersey, then down to Charleston. And then
can I, James, are you okay if I ask a question to the whole group?
Please, yes, we can put everybody in the Brady Bunch.
So here's what I want to find out from each of you, and I'm going to start with I'll start with Gabriel, because I listened to one of your recent episodes with a chaser that was chasing during the Mississippi tornado outbreak we just had last week. And you mentioned, or I thought I saw something on Twitter where you talked about, because we've been the same way. We've tried to be a timeless show. We don't talk a lot about a lot of current events, but we had a show the day that Hurricane Ian hit landfall, and we talked to a couple chasers and a resident, and that was a really popular show, but it was certainly a stray from what we typically do. And I thought I heard you say that yours was pretty popular as well. So my question to the whole group, but Gabriel, I'll start with you. Do you have a goal to try and be timeless, to where you're not talking about current events and someone could listen to your show at any year, any time, and it's still going to be relevant? Or are you, maybe based on that one episode, are you looking at maybe trying to do some more timely current event kind of shows?
Well, thank you for the question, because that's actually the other thing that I was hoping I would get a chance to mention. It's definitely something I have been considering quite a bit, because up until this point, Chaser Chat has been purely timeless episodes. Everything's been evergreen. I could, tweet out an episode that happened 3 years ago and it would be just as relevant as it was when it was first recorded. And I've had this thought for a while now, since I am specifically geared towards storm chasing, that wouldn't it be cool to get a chance to talk with folks as soon as it is, safely possible, even if they're just driving home, I can call their phone on Zoom. And I was like, well, this event that occurred on Friday night with the Mississippi tornado, obviously, it was absolutely devastating, just tremendous tragedy. And there's obviously going to be a lot of people who are interested in hearing about what it was like in the direct aftermath of that. So I just decided to call up one of the chasers. I DM'd a bunch of people. I called up one of the chasers. They talked to me for about 10 minutes. And like you mentioned, I was blown away, because it now has been 5 days and it is already the most popular episode that I have posted. We're talking even episodes that I posted 3 years ago with like Pecos Hank, Skip Talbot, Dr. Lee Orff. It just on a quick check today has already outperformed all of those. So I do think I'm going to be doing a few more of those into the future. Obviously, it's tough. I'm not sure what everyone's situation is here in terms of your full-time jobs, if this is your full-time job. I have a separate job other than just podcasting. So trying to coordinate all that on the fly might be a little challenging, but I do think the payoff will be worth it. And I think as long as you're dropping some evergreen content into the feed with some time-sensitive content, I think people will be appreciative of that.
So Joe, I'm going to jump to Joe, because I know you guys do cover a lot of current events, current weather events, but how do you try to mix that up a little bit? Do you like sticking to current events? What's your philosophy there?
Well, yeah, I think people are drawn to us, as I mentioned earlier, especially when there are major weather events taking place, and not necessarily locally. I think one of the more popular conversations that we had outside of the New York area was back in September of last year with Hurricane Fiona, which was headed not for Florida or not for the Carolinas, but for Nova Scotia. And that afternoon, less than 24 hours before landfall, I got the idea that, hey, maybe somebody at one of the radio stations in Nova Scotia might be interested in talking to us. And we were able to hook up with somebody and spent a good 15 minutes. And he was going point by point over everything that was happening. And it gave you a real feel prior to the landfalling of what was going to happen to a major city. I don't think it was Halifax, but it was someplace east of Halifax, where there was a lot of concern. You could even tell in the gentleman's voice, we spoke to him over the phone, that there was a lot of concern, and a lot of people were getting ready, battening down the hatches, so to speak, for a major blow. Incidentally, the storm was not a hurricane when it made landfall in Nova Scotia, but an exceedingly strong extratropical storm with winds gusting to over 100 miles per hour. I don't know, quite frankly, when they go over 75, I don't care if whatever you want to call it, a hurricane or an extratropical storm or whatever, it does damage. And indeed, in the aftermath, we found out that it did a lot of damage, and a lot of people were out of power for many, many days. So that's an example of how we sometimes get involved with places other than New York, but we also talk in advance with major in advance of a major storm system with people over at the National Weather Service, Bill Goodman at up in New York City office of the National Weather Service, or even somebody who Joe and I went to school with at City College, Tony Gigi, who is now retired but was down at the Philadelphia Weather Service for many years. We get his expertise or his thoughts on an impending weather event. And I think that's what brings everything together on our Joe and Joe show, is the fact that we make it interesting. And as I think James mentioned earlier, there's nobody yelling in our ears saying, "Wrap it, Rayo, wrap it, wrap it." I mean, we can go when we get on a topic. We can go as long as we want. As Joe Cioffi has said many times, it's our show. Yep. We can do anything we want. We don't care if you don't want to watch us. Go ahead, go away. Then, but we're going to be here and we're going to talk about what we believe is important and what is interesting to our viewers, and that's great. That was always the most frustrating thing to me on television. Sure. Was the fact that if something really interesting I thought would be happening, sometimes up in the sky, I'd want to tell people about an overpass or an overflight of the space shuttle. And I'm just getting into it and telling people about it. And all of a sudden I'm hearing the director say, "All right, Rayo, wrap it. Or before the show even begins, Joe, we're going to cut you down from 2 minutes to a minute and a half because we're heavy tonight. And sometimes when that happens, I get cut down even more to like 115 or 1 million because whoever's in on the show, keeps going on and on and on. So it's great to be able to do a show like this on YouTube. And again, I give all the credit to Joe Cioffi because he was the one who kind of drew me into this. It was just him doing a solo. And one night at FiOS 1, while he was doing his solo, I just happened to walk in the studio where he was doing his show. And he called me over and he said, come on over. So I sat down next to him. We were chatting about weather and other things of the day. And a couple of days later, he said, "Would you come back on the show with me?" He said, "The public demands it."
Wow. Okay. Well, you found your new calling. I'm going to jump to Mike. I know, Mike, you guys are really focused a lot on the guests as well. But are you mixing in current weather events, or what have you found works best for you guys?
Well, I got to tell you, we are focused a lot on the guests, but one of our best episodes was when we did the long range forecast for the winter season. And that seemed to really, people are just enamored with what the winter might bring. So I feel like that one really hit a chord for a lot of people. So, and I know my co-host Brad, he's always pressing for us to, hey, we got to do something when a storm's happening. We got to be more on top of a nor'easter because we're up here in the Northeast. We're based out of New Jersey. And, but we always run into a conflict because then our actual duties as meteorologists informing our clients, that takes precedence over everything. So, having that extra time during the storm is always difficult to find. But maybe as we go into next winter, I think it's something we should consider a little bit more, especially hearing what Joe had to say there, at least before the storm. Maybe we get into the kind of crux of the forecast, what can go wrong, where this rain snow line is going to end up. Things like that might really resonate with a lot of our audience out there. So it's something I think we should probably consider a little bit more.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Mike said one of his most popular programs was about long range and about the upcoming winter season, for example. I just want to bring up here, we've had this gentleman on the show a couple of times, and his name is Jim Witt. And Jim does long range forecasts, and each fall he puts out a calendar with his long-range forecast, with his long-range predictions. Now, he and I are differing on his methodology. He uses, and I still don't understand how, he uses the moon, he uses the planets to forecast long-range weather forecast for the upcoming season. But the one thing that I do agree on is that this calendar, which I brought up, he's been putting out this calendar since 1986 with his long-range predictions, and he sells it. He's been on WHUD here in the Hudson Valley of New York for almost 50 years now. This calendar he sells every year, every single cent of this calendar doesn't go into his pockets. He formed the Hope for Youth Foundation, and all the money that is garnered from these calendars goes into children's charities, like, for example, Ronald McDonald House, St. Jude, like 30 different charities for kids that, as he said, has been dealt a bad hand in life. And single-handedly now, this man, he's a meteorologist. He's been, again, on the air for a good number of years here in the Hudson Valley. With these calendars, he has made, since 1986, nearly $5 million.
Yeah, that's great.
And that $5 million, again, all going to children's charities. So if you're interested, all you have to do is go on Google and type in Hope for Youth Foundation or Jim Witt, and you can find out more about Jim, his long-range methodology. I think he actually has a website called The Weather Whiz. And you could also find out, as we get toward the end of the year, how you might be interested in getting a copy.
I think there was, yeah, that's good. I think there was an NFL player that got caught at an airport with something called a whiz. I don't exactly remember the rest of that story, but I don't want to leave without bringing up James with that same question, because James, I think Carolina Weather Group, really, you guys, I think, have done a great job with balancing the guests and evergreen content with current weather events. And you figured out some, so I guess, mathematical equation to that somehow, but maybe sauce. Yeah, tell me about that.
I'm glad it looks like we've got it all figured out, because I do think it's ever evolving. But yeah, I'm going to say we struggle with that too, in the sense of what Mike was talking about, in that we all have other day jobs and a lot of them are weather related. So it's hard to be in two places at once trying to cover severe weather. So we try to balance in our shows and in our feed what is evergreen, what is going to have, as the analysts like to call it, the long tail, where the audience can enjoy it for a really long time into the future. That makes it very productive on our part. But again, the community responsibility, the community outpouring, we really see those spikes in audience numbers when we come into severe weather, tropical season. And so we know that we are in a good position. We feel confident that we can help prepare ahead of the storm with forecasts, with understanding of impacts, by answering questions. And then, frankly speaking, what our current plan is during a lot of severe weather outbreaks is, if we can be live, we will be. And if we can't be live, then we rely on a lot of the great resources that are available to us into this country from the NOAA and the National Weather Service, by putting up radar and warnings and information that is coming in essentially off the wire and streaming that out. Because while I would love to be there all the time, because it's not my full-time job, because it's not the full-time job of the other hosts, we can't always physically be there, but we still want the information coming out. And that's where I think we've reached a good balance. What about you, Phil? I want to ask you before we go here, if there anything else about Stormfront Freaks you wanted to mention that we hadn't yet touched upon.
No, it's like I said, we're ever evolving. We're constantly trying to, get better and figure out what's the next step. And we've got a great group of co-hosts now that we've had for a number of years together. We went through some turnover with some for a while that just, had different commitments and such that they couldn't stick around. But we've now got a good group. We've got Greg Johnson, who's a professional storm chaser up in Canada. What's cool about this podcast for me is I get to do it with my older brother, MJ, who is, he's a county Skywarn coordinator up in Minnesota. So we get to do that together. He also gets to be the guy that pushes all the buttons behind the scenes too. But we have Dina Knightley, meteorologist with weather.com. We've got Jen Watson, who's a meteorologist and does some work with the Weather Channel. Serena Arnold, who's former meteorologist at Mount Washington Observatory. We've got Mark Massaro. We call him Maz because we have two Marks on the show, but he's a former TV meteorologist in the Cincinnati area. And we've got Brady Harris, who is a somewhat recent grad from Ohio State's meteorology program. So just it's a cool bunch of people. We have a lot of fun, and now we're doing a chasecation once every year. We head out to the plains and do a week-long chase, and we just have a lot of fun. But I really appreciate this time with all of you, and really some of the new shows that are on, and some that have been around for a little while. But just getting a chance to share some ideas and learn about you as well.
I think the most important thing for a person like yourself, for a person like Gabriel, for a person like James and Mike, is the fact that the reason why I think all of us are successful in our podcast is that the people who watch us trust us. I more often than not, I've heard from people who watch Joe and Joe and have told Joe or myself, we believe you, we understand what you're saying, but we have a trust in what you're telling us about, let's say, an impending big storm. Unlike television, some TV, weathercasters who really are being fed the information. They don't have any information, no knowledge whatsoever what they're talking about. But maybe a private weather service like AccuWeather is giving them all the stuff to say on the air. But there's not much in the way of credibility. I think that for people like us, people who are really, in some cases, even frightened about what may be coming their way in terms of a tropical cyclone or a major snowstorm or a blizzard or possibly losing power, they come to people like us to hear the real poop, if I may use that term. And I think that's where I think a lot of us get a lot of our credibility and a lot of our success on these podcasts and on these telecasts on YouTube is from the fact that people know who we are, they know of our knowledge, and they know that we're going to be telling them or giving them the best information possible based on the National Weather Service or based upon our own empiricism and our own knowledge that we built up over many, many, many years in the business.
Real poop, Joe. You can use that term with me anytime. I get it. I get it.
I love this hyper-local niche content you can't find anywhere else. As we wrap things up, each one of you in 10 seconds or so. Phil, you're up on the screen now. Where can people find and watch Stormfront Freaks?
So just you can check us out at stormfrontfreaks.com, and that'll give you all the links and all the access to everything we got.
Gabriel, Chaser Chat, where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter at CrazyGaby, that's Gabey, or you can go to @ChaserChat. You can also go to chaserchat.com.
Mike, where can we find the Weather Lounge?
You can find the Weather Lounge anywhere you find podcasts on your iTunes, your Google app, or whatever it may be. Just search us and we'll show up.
Joe, where can we find you and Joe?
You can find us on Joe Cioffi's YouTube channel. Go on to YouTube, type in Joe Cioffi, Cioffi, and you'll be brought to his channel. And that's where Joe and Joe is most every weeknight, and again on Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Eastern Time.
I love it. Thank you so much. I'm James Breiton on behalf of the Carolina Weather Group, where you can find on YouTube, wherever you listen to audio podcast, or carolinaweathergroup.com. We appreciate you all joining us tonight here on our panel, and to you listening and watching wherever it may be that you are watching or listening. We appreciate your love for weather, and we hope you will check out one of these shows if you haven't already. And hey, if we forgot a show, we didn't do it on purpose, so drop us a comment. Let us know what shows you want to see in next year's National Weather Podcast Month. On behalf of all these great guys, I'm James Breiton. Thanks so much for joining us. See you again back here real soon. Bye-bye.